right now, but I'm ethnically Korean. I'm a third generation Korean Canadian, originally from Vancouver. I moved to Hokkaido as a PhD student. I finished my PhD there, and now I'm working there. So it's been about 15 years since I moved to Sapporo, Hokkaido. Do you all know where Hokkaido is? Yeah? Okay, all right. So it's in the northern part of Japan. We do have the best beer in the world. I can say that because I've been drinking it for the last 15 years. Sapporo beer, yes. If you ever have a chance to come, please do let me know. We do have a summer school. Sorry, I'm like advertising our university here, but we do have a summer school every year at the university, and it's open to everyone around the world. There are classes for undergraduate students and graduate students as well. So if you're interested in coming and spending some time in the summer in Hokkaido, please do have a look. It's called the Hokkaido University Summer Institute. Okay. So with that, so today we've been hearing a lot about Korea. So just to get you going here a little bit, I'll just show you some photos of Korea. You've probably seen this through the news, through the media. This is the protest against the Park Geun-hye administration. This was in Yeouido. A lot of young students were protesting against the administration they're supporting the impeachment. Another photo. These are all some of the photos I've taken myself. Some of them it's from the media. This one is also from the media. It says 대한민국은 민주주의 국가입니다. 물러나주세요. So she's I think in the news it said that she was a high school student. She was very worried about the future of the country. And in Korean it says Republic of Korea is a democratic country. Please leave. This is something very recent. So President Trump was just in Korea. He started his Asia tour from Hawaii. He went to Japan. Third stop was Korea. Fourth stop China. Now I think he's making his way here, right, to the Philippines. This is an anti-Trump protest in downtown Seoul near Gangwon-gun. For those of you who are familiar with the area. You see, I don't know if it's clear enough, but you see people from all ages and men, women. They're all sitting and they're sitting and protesting the visit. They don't want him to come. And who would help him to come? No, sorry. Okay, another one. Again, so you see these photos. If you see through these photos, you see a lot of active participation of the people. Now, I think that's going to be kind of one of the morals of today's story. But you see, young students who are protesting against Mr. Trump coming to Korea. So Trump, get out. And this is, basically taking place last week, the whole last week, and there were protests all day. And I'm sure you all heard of it in the news and everything. I'll show you a different side of Korea. Now, again, so when I talk about Korea, I do mean South Korea. But when I do talk about North Korea, I'll say North Korea or NK. Okay, so this is the other side of Korea. So you've probably seen these photos as well through the media. This is Kim Jong-un, the son of Kim Jong-il. And of course, he's on the news quite often. Being in Hokkaido, actually, just a couple of months ago, there was a missile that went over our head, which dropped 2,000 kilometers off the coast. So it really, it's very, very far. But we have what we had was in June. At 6 o'clock in the morning when they did launch the missile. We have these alarms, so our smartphones, they're supposed to ring. The reason why we have it is because we have earthquakes in Japan, yeah? So it's called J Alert, and basically the government, sends out these alerts, and it's for earthquakes that are above 3 or 4 on the Richter scale, or missiles. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, it rang. We thought that there was an earthquake that just happened. It was a missile. But then, it was sort of they were overdoing this whole crisis. There's going to be a nuclear crisis. There's going to be a war. So this overreaction in Japan. And so he was all over the news in Japan. I mean, there was not a day that went by without him on the TV. So, so this is the other side of Korea. Again, I think this too probably might be familiar to you as well. These parades, by the people, these mass games in the middle of Pyongyang. This also might be familiar to some, maybe not as familiar as some of the other photos. So of course, there is a humanitarian crisis taking place in North Korea. We do have a lot of defectors defecting to China. This is in early 2000s, where a North Korean family, they crossed the border and they were running into the South Korean embassy in China, in Shanghai, sorry. And the security guard was trying to stop them. They did eventually end up on the other side of the embassy, and this family was lucky enough to get to South Korea, but as you know, not all of them are successful. Okay. So today we've been talking a lot about Korea, and so I guess I don't need to repeat, some of the things that people were saying today. The sudden interest in Korea, of course, there's various reasons. The obvious reason, of course, and from what I have heard from all of you, K-pop, K-drama. This is something that's been a sort of a reason for people to get interested in Korea. For some of the other reasons, you can say the sort of the economic and political development in South Korea, the sort of miracle, the Hangang miracle, we say Hangang Kijok. So the economic growth that they have experienced, also the consolidation to democracy. 2017 marks the 30th year of the democratization movement, democratization of South Korea. Also, the Korean Peninsula is one of the very few sort of a place where the war is still not finished. Yes. So the 38th parallel, that is a ceasefire. There is no peace treaty that has been signed. As you know, it's an unfinished war. The Cold War has not ended in the Korean Peninsula. Also, the soft power, as we were saying, K-pop, K-drama, and the sort of repeated crises that we have with North Korea. So all of these reasons, of course, this is not all of them, but they do make up some of the reasons why there is this interest in Korea per se, in Korean politics. Now, my job today is I'm going to try to at least answer some of the questions that you have. If I don't cover them, please do ask me at the Q&A. But I will go through some of the important issues, the important sort of turning points and important sort of points to understand Korean politics. Now, again, I'm supposed to talk about Korean politics, about 70 years worth of information in 2 hours. So I will have to skip some parts. But like I said, if you do have any questions, please do feel free to ask me at any time, or you can leave it till the end if you like. These are some of the things that I will cover today. Now, first, of course, we do need to do a brief historical overview of the two Koreas. We came on the understanding that Professor Duncan would have gone first, but he'll give you the details, so I'll just make it very brief. So I'll do that in the beginning. Next, I'll look at democratization itself, the process, and the consolidation to democracy. Now, you might have a question: is really Korea a true democracy? Some people might have this question in their mind. I'll try to give you some sort of tips and hints to think about this question. Okay, political economy, of course, the economic growth in Korea has been something that everybody has been talking about and research about. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Also, political institutions. What's the president's power? What can he and she do? Is the president really a strong president, or is the president, or is he or she's a weak president? So I'll give you some sort of ideas to think about that. Of course, I can't leave the North Korean issue out, so I'll briefly touch upon that. And then last but not least, I'll talk about some of the issues that are coming up today, which Professor Ri and Professor Einstein have already covered, but maybe I'll give you a little bit different angle to it. Okay? So that's a lot. That's a lot that I need to talk about in 2 hours, but hopefully I can go through them now. I do have PowerPoints with photos and pictures, so it's not going to be all words. So hopefully it's going to be a bit entertaining for you. This is the map of the Korean Peninsula. Of course, geopolitically they are situated where you have China on the other side of the border. We have Japan on the other side, and the Korean Peninsula has been, for many years, been sort of a place where geopolitical conflict has been taking place. Now, I always, my first year students, my undergrad students, I always show the map and I say, what does it look like? What does the Korean Peninsula look like? It looks like a bunny. It looks like a rabbit. Yeah. I don't know if you say this in the Philippines. We say this in Japan. Yeah. So yeah, it looks like a bunny. So that's the ears. It's standing on its back leg. Yeah. Stand like this. Yeah. So if you want to improvise, if you don't have a map of Korea handy, just go like this. Korean looks like this. So that's a bunny. That's the ear. That's the face, and then that's the front legs, and then the back legs, and then that's the tail. Should always be a tail. So wanted to share that. Okay, just to give you a really brief chronology, most of you probably are well aware, but the Korean history sort of is divided in, or started from the First Republic, and when there is a constitutional amendment, it becomes a new republic. And so we have 6 republics in Korea. First Republic was established in 1948 by Sigmund Rhee. I'll explain to you how that happened. During this time, there was the 419 uprising. We say Saibu in Korean. So the April 19th student movement or student revolution in 1960. That was the sort of point that sort of brought the regime down, and which caused the transfer to the Second Republic. Now, the Second Republic was very short-lived. It was so after the fall of Sigmund Rhee, the Second Republic was led by Changmyeon, and the First Republic was, of course, established as a presidential system. But then, because of the corruption so because of corruption, so they decided they would change the presidential system to a parliamentary system. So they tried that, but of course, with the military coup by General Park Chung-hee, the Second Republic finishes in only 1 year. So the Third Republic takes place after his coup d'etat from 1963. It was a very long, as you know, long regime where he started, and that the Third Republic ends just in the beginning of the Yushin, which is 1972. The Fourth Republic starts from 1972 until his assassination. And right after the death of Park Chung-hee, people were waiting for the moment, for when people were able to really exercise their political rights. But as you know, then there was the May uprising, the Gwangju uprising, and that was because it was the Gwangju uprising was against the establishment of the Fifth Republic under Chung Do-han. Again, there was another coup d'etat. And he becomes president in 1981, and in 87 there is the first presidential election in Korea. The Sixth Republic is a very long-living one since 1988, and those are the names of the presidents that had taken office during the Sixth Republic. Now, I won't go through every single one of them, but I will mention some of the characteristics and also show you some of the photos of the presidents in a bit. Now, when we talk about the history of Korea, what are the causes of the division of the Korean War? So there are many people that study this, but I'll just give you a sort of a brief overview of the cause and why there was a division in the Korean Peninsula. Also, what effects did the division of the two countries have, and how is this division affecting Korea today? So, as you know, Korea was under the Japanese occupation. They were annexed in 1910. 1945, with the end of the Second World War, came liberation. With the liberation, there was a temporary division. And as you know, of course, the northern side was supported by the Soviet Union. There was a trusteeship on the southern side by the Americans. And what really divided the two countries was two incidents. Of course, in 1948, there was the establishment of two Koreas. They had an election on the southern side under the auspice of the UN, and that was the establishment of the Republic of Korea. And so just about a month after that, and on the northern side, DPRK was established, and that set the stage for the division of the two Koreas. Now, in 1950, as you know, the Korean War takes place. The Korean War takes place for 3 years, but the battle, the actual military conflict was in the first year. The second and third year was negotiations. They couldn't see eye to eye, but that basically fixed the division of the two Koreas. Now, I won't go through every one of them, but these are some of the key moments, some of the things you should remember when you're teaching the Korean history. I'm sure Professor Tekin would talk more about it in detail. The causes, first of all, in 1943, during the Cairo conference, U.S., Britain, and China declare future Korean independence in due course. They left it at that. At the subsequent Tehran conference, Stalin agrees with this. In 1945, the USSR declares war on Japan. The Americans propose to the USSR the 38th parallel as the line of demarcation, and to this, USSR agrees. Japan surrenders on the 15th of August. At the Moscow conference, the U.S., Britain, USSR agreed that they agree on the 5-year trusteeship for Korea. Now, in 1946, after the war, the first U.S.-USSR Joint Commission to implement the Moscow trusteeship agreement adjourns without an agreement. In 1947, the second Joint Commission fails. The U.S. takes the Korean question to the UN General Assembly, and the USSR protests. In 1948, a UN delegation to supervise the general election in the Korean Peninsula arrives. The UN decides to hold elections only in the U.S.-occupied southern half of the peninsula. As I mentioned earlier, the Republic of Korea, established with Syngman Rhee as their first president in August 15, and DPRK established with Kim Il-sung as the premier. And in 48 to 49, the Soviet troops and U.S. troops withdraw from Korea. South Korea is excluded from the U.S. defense perimeter. Now, with this, the North Koreans attack on June of 1950. The Korean War begins with a large-scale invasion of South Korea by North Korea. And in 1953, the Korean War ends in an armistice. As I said, it's not a peace treaty, and the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, that is created. That fixes the division of the two countries. So what are some of the effects? What are some of the effects of the division? Now, for the South, of course, one is the delayed democratization. South Korean state at the time was anti-communist rather than a liberal democratic state. In South Korea, even today, it's more about the elimination of the left and the red complex. We call it Baimini in Korean. Just to give you an anecdote, just to share an anecdote. My relatives, I have still some relatives in Korea, and they showed me some of their old textbooks, and they portrayed North Korean people as wolves. And I'm not kidding you. They weren't even drawn as people. They were animals, and this is how they were taught. Back in the 1960s, and this idea of the communists coming to occupy them, to invade them, is still a very serious issue. Of course, it's with Kim Dae-jung, with Roh Moo-hyun, with the Sunshine Policy. Things have changed a little bit, but I would argue that the idea of the leftist idea, the idea of getting rid of the fighting is still a very strong sentiment in Korea. Also in Korea, the military and the students were most powerful groups. There were lost opportunities for democratization right after, of course, the end of Syngman Rhee's regime. Everyone thought that this is going to be the spring. This is going to be spring of Seoul. Didn't happen then. When Park Chung-hee was assassinated, again, people had their hopes up. That was also that opportunity failed. For North Korea, what was the effect for North Korea? Now, for North Korea, it was the Kim dynasty's claim to legitimacy. They needed to hang on to they claimed that they were going to unite the Korea, the two Koreas once again. So basically, to put it to make it simple, external threat was a rationale for authoritarian rule in both Koreas. So for South Koreans, it was the communists. They had to. Syngman Rhee repeated that he was determined to make sure that the communists would invade and that they would win. For North Korea, the same thing as well. They were determined that they were going to unite the Koreas. So it was the external threat on both sides. This became sort of the rationale for the authoritarian rule to continue that long in both Koreas. And also, obviously for North Korea, it's still continuing. Now, let me talk a little bit about the democratization and consolidation to democracy. So some of the things that you want to have in your mind as questions. So what explains the collapse of the Rhee government? How was Park's regime able to last so long? What factors account for the democratic transition in 1987? Has Korea's democracy been sufficiently consolidated? This could be a discussion question. What is the relationship between democracy and economic development? This is not just about Korea, but there are a lot of countries where there's debate about the relationship between democracy and economic development. Now, I'm sure they would have had a fit if I had put them all together like this. Just to show you some photos of the past presidents. So starting from Syngman Rhee, Chang-myeon, Park Chung-hee. I'm sure they would have hated it. They're probably turning in their graves right now. Chung Han, Roh Moo-hyun, they're still alive, but they probably won't have a problem with it. I don't know about these three. They might not have a problem, I guess. Yeah, they were friends and enemies, friends and enemies at the same time. Kim Yong-sam, Kim Dae-jung, and Roh Moo-hyun. Lee Myung-bak, Park Ateneo. And last but not least, Moon Jae. So that's a few presidents there. Okay. So remember their faces because I'm going to be talking about them in a bit. Okay, so again, sorry, just to I'll make it really simple, but I need to cover these important points. On May 10th of 1948, there was a general election for Constitutional Assembly, and July of that same year, Constitution was a compromise of presidential and parliamentary system. Now, I won't go into the detail. I could probably go on forever if I describe the election, the presidential system, the political system, the elections. I won't do that today. But if you just remember that it was a compromise of a presidential and a parliamentary system. August of that year, as I mentioned, RK is established. Syngman Rhee is the first president. And in 1948, the first thing he does is establish a national security law. Now, this national security law still exists today. And this causes all sorts of problems in Korea. If basically the national security law, it'll come back, come back up time to time. But this was the reason. This was the reason why people were taken to jail. They were for illegal riots and being spies of the communist regime. And this law still exists, and people can still be taken to jail for violating the national security law. And 1952, there was a constitutional amendment, and this amendment made the presidential election a direct presidential election. In 1954, there was another constitutional amendment, and it was the removal of the two-term limit for the first president. So the Constitution in the beginning had said that the president would resort to 2 terms. That would be the limit. But in 1954, Syngman Rhee decides to remove that limit, and so that he can continue his authoritarian rule. Of course, there were people that had all sorts of problems with this. During this time, there were a lot of censorship. People were being jailed for various reasons, and so this is why the students rose up to the occasion. And the student revolution, it started out from the small city of Masan in the southern part of Korea. And what actually sort of triggered it all was the death of a student named Kim Ju-yoon. And he was found dead one morning, and people were furious about this. The students were furious about this, and then so the movement which started from Masan has spread all over Korea, which ultimately brings down the Syngman Rhee regime. This is a photo from the 419. It's from the 419 museum, and this is the actual footage of the student protests. In July of 1960, the Second Republic is established. It was a parliamentary system, and the prime minister was Chang Myon at the time. And they wanted to bring. They had the Second Republic, of course, didn't want another. They didn't want another regime like Syngman Rhee's regime. They tried everything. They were trying to work towards making a democratic state in Korea, but it fails at the end because of Park Chung-hee's military coup on May 16th of 1961. And after the coup, he establishes the Third Republic and changes to the presidential system again, and he launches the Third Republic, and he becomes the president. And in 1969, he amends the Constitution to having, yes. Oh, sorry, it's okay, I'll change it. I'll change it. Sorry, yeah. Oh, does it have a laser pointer? Ah, okay, right, okay. So in 1969, he amends the Constitution, and he enables himself to serve for 3 terms, or the president to serve for 3 terms. And in 1972, he revises the Constitution again, and it's called what is called the Yushin Constitution. Yushin comes from Ishin, from Japan. And it made his presidency for a lifetime. So basically, he decided he was going to be the legitimate president that would continue his rule until the basis was that he would unite Korea together. One of the reasons why he did this was because in the 1960s and 1970s, the North Korean economy was doing much, much better than the South Korean economy. That was one of the reasons he felt that he needed to continue his authoritarian rule. And in 1974, and from 1974 to 1975, he announces the emergency decree number 129. And basically, people were deprived of their civil rights. They were deprived of their freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. If you look at the newspapers from this time, from 1960s and 1970s, many of them are blacked out. So I mean, basically, you can't read the newspaper. And I actually, for my master's thesis, I wrote about Catholic democratization movement in the 1970s, and I couldn't get any information from the newspaper because it was all blacked out. That was it's part of the idea that the citizens shouldn't have any, they shouldn't be given any ideas of overthrowing the regime. Of course, this continued until 1979. And in October of 26, he's assassinated by his right-hand man, who was the KCIA chief, Kim Jae-gyun. And right, of course, again, in 1979, people thought, okay, maybe this is a time where Korea will become a democratic country. Again, their hopes are washed away because General Chun Doo-han, who was also he was one of these subordinates of Park Chung-hee, attempts a coup d'etat. He succeeds, and he takes over the Korean government. And the Gwangju uprising and massacre that occurs in May of 1980 was, of course, protesting against Chun Doo-han's coup d'etat. And in February of 1981, the Fifth Republic launches with Chun Doo-han as president, and he revised the constitution so that the presidency is a single term for 7 years. And again, there's demonstrations that take place all over the country against Chun Doo-han. And in June of 1981, there were popular demonstrations for democratization. And finally, on June 29th of the same year, Rotae declares there's the Rotae's Declaration for Demonstration. Again, so let's show some photos. This is the Gwangju. This is a photo of Gwangju. This is in 1980. These are students and citizens that are protesting against Chun Doo-han. So what Chun Doo-han did was he dispatched the military police to of course to get to sort of to ask them to die down, right? So so you see these tanks, and this was broadcasted all over the world by actually a couple of foreign correspondents at the time. There's a movie out in Korea right now. It's called 운전기사, right? Yeah, 택시 운전사. And it's based on a true story of a Korean taxi driver who takes a German foreign correspondent, and he helps the German foreign correspondent to get to Gwangju so that he can report about it. And these photos, of course, these types of photos were broadcasted all over the world. This is a photo of the June demonstration. Does anybody know where this is?
Gwangju.
I think someone just said it.
No.
It's Seoul Station. Yeah, Seoul Station, yeah. And they're demonstrating in front of the station. Of course, it's downtown Seoul. You can see there's buses here. The polices. This is the police buses, and there's throwing tear gas at the time. This is a newspaper article from then. It says 대학생 고문받은 중 사망. So this was again back in 1987. These students that were protesting against Chun Doo-han. Many students lost their lives while protesting, and this was a newspaper article about a student that had died. The reason why it became news was because he was from Seoul National University. As he says, 서울대 언어학과 박종철. So this student that had died was a student of Seoul National University by the name of Park Jong-chol, and this was all over the headline news because he was he was caught by the police, taken to jail, and he was tortured, and he died while they were interrogating him. And so this newspaper, it says "go guy" in Japanese. Sorry, basically it's not the ordinary news. So it was a news that they had written just to specifically talk about the incident, to present the incident. At that time, actually in 1987, it wasn't only just students and labor workers that protested against the regime. Many women at the time also protested. So this was the Korean Women's Association, and they were protesting against the regime. And they were seeking for the improvement of their status. And you see, so it was around this time in 1987. You saw a lot of women also getting up and protesting against the regime as well. And so what happens after that? In 1985, there's the general election. So in 1985, they have the first general election, election where people can vote. The ruling party got only 35% of the court, 35% of the vote. And there was strong performance of the new opposition led by Kim Dae-jung and Kim Yong-sam. And opposition got support from workers, farmers, and students. And opposition organized around, what they organized around was constitutional reform, especially direct presidential elections. And in June of 29, there was a declaration of democratic reform. There was constitutional amendment for direct presidential election, amnesty for Kim Dae-jung, some of the other very famous political prisoners. He also said that they would restore the freedom of the press. They would also restore local self-government. All of this was not possible during Park Chung-hee and Chun Doo-hwan. Also, National Assembly drafted and approved the new constitution of the Sixth Republic and ratified it in the national referendum. There was a presidential election in 1987, and Roh Tae-woo wins the election. But this was sort of a tactical error on the opposition side because Kim Dae-jung and Kim Yong-sam both had run for the election and kind of split the votes for the Democratic candidates. And also another reason why Roh Tae-woo won the election was because of the strong regionalism in Korea. Now, do you all know about the regionalism in Korea? Do you know what that is all about? Yeah? Oh, some of you know, some of you don't. So, of course, this has changed as well in Korea. But there is a strong opposition between two particular regions. One is Jeollado, which is in the west side of Korea, and Gyeonggi-do, which is on the southeast of Korea. And the reason the people say, the opposition between these two regions started from from long time ago, like a petition or whatever. But personally speaking, of course, I don't really buy that. Regionalism was one of the reasons why was because most of the presidents that you saw, they're all from one region. They're from the southeast of Korea, from Gyeongsang-do. And so when they became presidents, they made a lot of investment for their home region, their home cities, but not much for Jeollado. And so that's the animosity between the two regions started from sort of the nepotism of these presidents. And Roh Tae-woo was from Gyeongsang-do area, and so many people, of course, voted for him. Not so much because they agreed to his policies, but because he was from their home country. They thought that they would be able to receive benefit if he became president. And Kim Yong-sam was also from Gyeongsang-do, but because he was from the opposition party, so some people voted for him. But then also Kim Dae-jung was running at the time, and so basically the two candidates for the opposition party, the Democratic candidates, they split the vote. And so at the end, Roh Tae-woo wins the election, and people were happy that they were able to vote for the president. This first time in history that they were able to vote for the president, but at the same time, they hoped that some people, of course, hoped that the Democratic candidates would win, but it ended up that Roh Tae-woo won the election. So as you know, Roh Tae-woo was sort of the right-hand man of Chun Doo-hwan. That's why a lot of people didn't like him, but it ended up that he won the election. Now, the idea of the consolidation to democracy. Now, again, this is something that we can discuss. Korea has enjoyed democracy for 30 years. Some people consider 30 years to be a very long time, or some people consider it to be a very short time. Now, personally speaking, I don't think 30 years is a very long time. It takes time for these things to consolidate. The ideas, and also policies. They need time for policies to change. And so, in some aspects, I think democracy has consolidated in Korea. First is the economic performance. They're doing really well in terms of the economy. Also, there's a lot of popular commitment. As you saw in many of the photos, these people have taken a chance to voice their opinion in demonstrations and protests. So there's a lot of popular commitment, and there's also engagement of civic life. And so, in a certain sense, I think the idea of democracy as the voice of the people, the will of the people, has become sort of baseline for everyone in Korea. And I think a lot of people in Korea they're really proud to say that they achieved democracy by themselves. It was the people's power. And this kind of continues on. Even today, I'll talk about it later on, but with the impeachment of Park Geun-hye, again, you see the people, standing up to Park Geun-hye. There's a term called the politics of square. And so basically, they go to the square and they protest, and then they voice their opinion. So in that sense, I think the idea of democracy has become has consolidated in Korea. But there are also problems. Like, for instance, the existence of the national security law is a sort of a problem, I think, personally speaking, to consolidation of democracy. Also, national intelligence services, during email back in Park Geun-hye administration, they were causing all sorts of problems. They were surveying people. They were looking at people's Kakao Talk, and this is not what democratic countries should be doing, right? Also, prosecution in Korea. Oftentimes, many of the judgments passed by the Korean courts are very politicized. People have criticized that politicized prosecution is not. Is a hindrance to democracy. Also, regionalism. The idea of regional sentiments have changed. I would have to say that has changed a lot. When I was a child, I remember some of my Korean relatives, even in Japan, my Korean relatives in Japan, saying that if you grow up and you marry a Korean man, don't ever marry someone from Chollado. And I was like, what does that mean? I didn't know what that meant. Of course, when I became an adult, I understood, but that's what they would say. And I remember while I was growing up, people randomly saying, people from Chollado, they lie. They lie all the time. So don't trust them. It's just things like that. And I mean, you think those are just sort of silly rumors, but people really believe this. Really believe this. There was I'll share you another anecdote. It was my friend's cousin at the time. My friend's cousin was the woman, and she was actually second generation Korean American, and she was her family. Her grandparents are from Chollado. And so she was on the language program at Yonsei University. She was at Oaxaca. She met a really nice Korean man there, and they decided to get married. And it just happens so that his family's from Gyeongsangdo. And so when he brought her to his home to meet the parents freaked out. They're like, we don't want our son. And he was the eldest son too at the time. He was the eldest son. So at the time, the parents were just freaking out. They're saying, my son, my very precious son, is not going to marry someone from Chollado. But this is the catch. She's not from Chollado. She's from California. She's from Los Angeles. She's second generation Korean American. But they still couldn't understand. They couldn't accept the fact that the mom-in-law, especially, I'm not going to have a Chollado menuny. No, that's not going to happen in my lifetime. I mean, this is the reaction, and this is not a very long time. I mean, it's only 15 years ago. So, I mean, like I said, sentiments have changed. I think a lot of people now, many young people are born and raised in Seoul, and I think there is a lot more understanding between the two. One of the, I think, catalysts to that understanding is the election where Roh Moo-hyun got elected. As you know, Roh Moo-hyun is from Gyeongsangdo. He's from that area, but he was the candidate for the Democratic Party, which is basically based in Chollado. Their support is based in Chollado, and he won like 80% of the votes from Chollado. So that was sort of a turning point for Korean regionalism. But in any case, regionalism, to some degree, I think is a problem when you think about the idea of consolidation to democracy. And also party politics. Now, some people say that there is a two-party system in Korea. with a couple of other opposition parties. Yes and no. With, as you know, the famous writing by George Henderson, Politics of the Vortex. So in Korea, they used to organize parties not so much because of the policy orientation, not because people, not because there was a strong party base, but it was more people. They thought if they stick with this person, they might get elected. So it was more sort of patronage. More sort of networks rather than sort of a solid party base. Now, I would say that has changed. As you know, there has been change of ruling party. With that, I think there is a general idea that there is two major parties in Korea. But as you know, the Saenuri, even during Romihan, the Democratic Party split with Yeonling Uridang, and also Saenuri split from Grand National Party, and so it's hard to say. I wouldn't say that it's perfectly a two-party system, but now I think much more than before you do see a little bit of this party politics. Now the third party in Korea, as you know, is the Kuminda, which is led by Ahn Cheol-soo. Again, people say that's the birth of the new opposition, a new opposition party in Korea. I would beg to differ because a lot of people that are in the party, in the Kumindan, they all basically organize themselves around Ahn Cheol-soo. I wouldn't say that it was because of his policy orientation. Personally speaking, he doesn't really have a platform, but I think it was much more that he was. It's just I think people like the idea of being with him much more so than agreeing with his policy. In any case, so some of these issues I think we can discuss. You can beg to differ. I would say these could be certain issues that I wouldn't say threaten democracy, but it could challenge the idea of whether Korea is truly a democratic country. At the same time, what is a truly democratic country? So depending on the definition, it might be a little bit different, but these are some of the things that you might want to think about. Okay, political economy and Korean politics. Some of the questions that you want to have in mind when you talk about political economy in Korea. What were the sources of the economic miracle? Why was the government intervention in Korea effective? Was authoritarian rule necessary for economic development? I think this is a question that everybody asks in many of the developing countries. So this is not a question just for Korea, but it applies to many other countries. It applies to, I think, many countries around the world. But these questions you might want to have in mind when you think about political economy. There's a wealth of literature written on the idea of developmental state. Amundsen, Chang, Evans, Haggard, Wu, all these famous scholars wrote about this. The idea of the role of the developmental state in Korea's economic growth. Many people think that the authoritarian rule was necessary for economic growth. Now, the difference between, I think, the Ri regime and the Park regime, Ri based much of his selection of his staff on patronage. So many of his bureaucrats were chosen from sort of personal networks. Whereas Park, he had very solid ideas of meritocracy. So he implemented the civil servant exam. So all the high-ranking civil servants, they had to pass an exam to become civil servants under the Park regime. Now, he appointed ex-military people in the sense due to patronage for domestic service ministers, but he was very particular about this, that he maintained professionalism in the key economic ministries. So this is not something that I said originally. It was by David Kang in 2002. Ri and Park. So the economic growth during the Park regime, you can say one of the reasons why is because of this idea of meritocracy. The other, of course, is the chaebol. So Park's chaebol favored policy led to the economic concentration, but at the same time, it also led to a collusion between the chaebol and government, which is still a problem today in Korea. It all started from around this time. The emphasis on heavy industries, sort of labor-intensive industries at the time, these all were reasons why Korea was able to experience the economic growth. Park Chung-hee was also very particular about another thing is human capital. So there was high level of human capital with basic literacy and numeracy. Universal primary education was pretty much something of the ordinary by 1960. And this was very suitable for low-skilled labor extensive industrialization in the 1960s during the Park regime. Many people have wrote about this, but there was very low level of inequality at that time. So this is another reason I think that some people have this sort of nostalgia for the Park, not the daughter, but the father. That was one of the reasons why I think the daughter was elected. But people are nostalgic of this period. Oh, that during that time, it was hard to live, but we all worked really hard. This is how we were able to, all of us worked together to bring the economic miracle. There was low level inequality. People, had enough to eat. Things like this. This idea, right? The memories can be deceiving at times, yeah. So the idea, this nostalgia, was one of the big reasons why President Park, the daughter, was elected. But in any case, so there was a low level of inequality at that time. And I wouldn't say there was a complete absence, but there was somewhat an absence of a dominant class. That's one of the reasons why I think there was also a low level of inequality. And all of this was very favorable for our state autonomy. And that kind of drove the economic growth in South Korea. Okay, next. Political institutions. I won't go into too much detail, but in terms of political institutions, just a couple of questions that you want to have in mind. What are the sources and limitations of presidential power in Korea? Is a president in Korea strong or weak? What's your impressions? Do you guys think the president in Korea is strong? Not so strong. Do you think they're strong? Yeah, that's true. They are strong in some sense, and they're weak also in some sense. But yeah, so have that in mind. What are the greatest challenges with regard to governability and accountability in Korea? Last, is regionalism detrimental to democratic consolidation in Korea? So there has been 2 attempts for impeachment in the history of South Korea. One failed, one succeeded. The failed one was during Roh Moo-hyun. The successful one was just not too long ago with Ateneo. Now, what was the big difference between the 2? I'll explain to you that in a bit. Now, Korea is regarded as an imperial presidency. Imperial presidency, I put that in quotation. So the idea that Korean presidents are strong, the reason why is because in terms of constitutional power, Korea has a very strong executive power. The source of their presidential power is strong. They have veto rights. They're able to budget making, decree authority, referendum. But that doesn't mean that they have omnibus power. There are some limitations to presidential power. The National Assembly, of course, you have to pass. If you have a policy, you need to pass it through the National Assembly. There's also the Constitutional Court. Now, this is the Constitutional Court is the one that makes the decision of whether the president is impeached or not. Partisan power. There is a frequent occurrence of divided government. Now, in Korea, there's 2 types of election. One is the presidential election, and then the National Assembly election. And now, in the history of Korea, there has been times where there was a divided government. It makes it very hard for the president to put through a policy because if it's divided, then there's they need to have approval from the National Assembly. Also, party discipline is it strong or weak? Like I said, I explained this to you a little bit earlier. I would say it's a little bit of both. They do have a lot of hard time selecting candidates. This is always a problem during the election. They have problems with, having one single candidate because everybody wants to be president of Korea. Also, the timing of the legislative elections, usually it comes after the presidential election. And so oftentimes what happens is every elected president in Korea is elected with very high hopes. And this is one of the reasons why it's also called imperial, is because they're almost considered like a king. Back in the Joseon dynasty, the king will make things, better for the country. So they come with very high hopes. But of course, because of the high hope, when they do become presidents and they don't follow through, or they don't see any sort of achievements of what they had said during the campaign, their support rate really, really decreases all of a sudden. And so when by the time the legislative elections come, then people vote. Oh, maybe this is not it. Maybe we should vote for the other party. So this is why oftentimes the Korean government there is a divided government, because one of the reasons why is because they become lame duck as soon as they're elected. You see what I mean? Because it's a single 5-year term. They're only elected for one term. They can't be re-elected because that's what the Constitution says. And so as soon as they're elected, basically there's no reason they don't need to perform. They don't really need to perform, right? Because they don't need to be re-elected. But it's for the party, of course. It's the party who, if they want to continue their governing, their governance. And so, of course, they do need to follow through. They need to make an achievement. But for the president personally, I mean, he or she is a lame duck as soon as he or she is elected, because he or she does not need to maintain legitimacy for him or her to be voted in again, because the Constitution doesn't allow it. Hence, that's why there's a divided government. A lot of people are very upset. They get really disappointed with the president, and then that's why they vote for the other party during the legislative election. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Okay, regionalism. Let me just, again, talk really briefly. So this side is Jeollado. This is where Gwangju is. This is where the 1987 Gwangju uprising happened. So this side is Jeollado. This side is Gyeongsang. I already explained to you, so I won't go into any more detail. But again, you see that regionalism is a big part of Korean politics, because it's not so much now, but in the past, you see that voting behavior was very much divided along the regions, and it came out really clear. I mean, I'm not a quantitative analysis person, but there are all sorts of writings on this. And people have done analysis on the voting behavior of different regions, and it does come out as a president who's from Jeollado, they vote for him. If the president is from Gyeongsang-do, they vote for the president who's from Gyeongsang-do. Now, the exception was, of course, Roh Moo-hyun, which he was from Gyeongsang-do area. But his base was in Jeollado. His support base was in Jeollado because he was from the Democratic Party. If you see his numbers again, 80% of the people from Jeollado voted for him, and I think not even 20%. Sorry, I might be wrong, but people voted for him from Gyeongsang. And also Moon Jae-in too. Moon Jae-in also was one of the other candidates. If you see the voting behaviors for his election, you see less of that. But having said that, the voting behavior of people from Gyeongsang-do, there was high vote for the other candidates from Saenuri-dang. And so you do see both candidates were from Gyeongsang-do. Okay. The only thing was that Moon Jae-in was from the Democratic Party. So you see, when you see the voting patterns for Moon Jae-in, you see that people from Jeollado had voted for Moon Jae-in because of the party base, and the opposition candidate from Saenuri had gained a lot of vote from Gyeongsang-do. So you still see some this regional divide when there is a presidential election. Okay, next is the North Korean issue. Now, when you think of North Korea, what is your image? See, I asked this question to my Japanese students, and I'll tell you what they say. But what do y'all think when you hear the word North Korea?
Militarism.
Sorry? Militarism, yes. Okay, what else?
Missiles.
Missiles, yes. Right. Do you think that North Korea is a closed society? That's a closed society? Okay. Okay. My students in Japan pretty much say the same thing. And then the next thing I say to them is, well, actually, there are embassies in North Korea. They have diplomatic relations with more than 100 countries. And they get really, really surprised. They're like, wow, really? So Japan is one of the few, United States again, one of the few who don't have foreign relations with North Korea.
We have.
Yeah, right. So they're not really as close as we think they are. And of course, I'm not here to support the North Korean regime or anything, but what I'm going to try to do is try to see the North Korean issue from their perspective, if I can do it properly. Okay, so first, what are the characteristics of North Korean politics? So how did the Sunshine Policy during the Kim Dae-jung administration help North Korea to reform? What is the current status of humanitarian issues in North Korea? So characteristics of North Korean politics, one is juche. So you've probably heard this word. Juche is the philosophy. It's sort of a type of a nationalism. And it's also very neo-Confucianistic. It's sort of the idea of self-reliance, that they will remain true to the development of their own country. They won't rely on anybody else but themselves. This is the idea of juche. I'm very, very much simplifying it. Okay, and this idea enabled the succession of Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un. And as you mentioned, militarism. So military first politics. This is characteristic of North Korean politics, and the parallel development of economy and nuclear weapons. And they have very much strong, pervasive control over the country. Now, North Korea deems itself as the solely legitimate government of Korea. And they oppose the cross-recognition of the two Koreas in the UN membership until 1991. After 1991, both of them are represented in the UN. From the North Korean perspective, the Korean War was to unify the country. It wasn't about aggression. They were trying to unify this divided country. And they also have this mentality, this siege mentality. They fear threat to security. They fear that they would be absorbed by the South. And this is where I want you to think a little bit about the nuclear program. Now, the idea of juche, that they're not relying on anybody else but themselves. They promise to develop and protect their country. So for a small country like North Korea, right? And their idea of this fear of constant fear of being maybe they might be absorbed by the South. People kind of put it off as Kim Jong-un being very irrational. Mr. Trump as comment about Rocket Man, he's a little Rocket Man, But I would like to, my argument is that North Korea is not irrational. They do have foreign relations with a lot of countries. They're close but open at the same time. They have tourists coming in. Of course, it's all controlled, but they have people coming into the country. It's not that they have high borders where people can't cross or anything. And the rationale behind the nuclear program, not that of course that makes it okay, is that they're protecting themselves. They're a small country with very little resource, always being threatened by outside forces. They need to arm themselves to protect themselves. This is the rationale behind North Korean regime. So I would argue that they're not irrational. I would actually argue that he's very rational. He knows what cards to play. Each president had their own idea of how to deal with North Korea. very different in terms of the presidents. But Sigmund Rhee, he criticized the North Korean side to opposing the armistice. He also opposed the armistice, and he said, we should march north. Very hard line. He had a very hard line towards North Korea. Park, he also mentions many times that we have to prevail over communism. This idea of getting rid of all the bargaining from Korea. Rotae, this is when relations with USSR also is normalized. So he talks about the reconciliation and cooperation, not with only North Korea, but with those socialist countries, other socialist countries. So it was part and parcel of this idea of North politics. Kim Il-sung was inconsistent. He had other problems to deal with, and he kind of one time he would say yes, we have we should engage them, and then sometimes he would say no, we should hit them hard. So he was very inconsistent. Kim Dae-jung, as you know, the sunshine policy, the idea of him, the South being the sun, and engaging the North. Roh basically, took over the sunshine policy. He put it in different words. He said peace and prosperity, but the idea was, very much to engage the North Koreans. Lee Myung-bak, he talked about denuclearization, and in the beginning he talked about opening up and making a win-win situation between the two. But as the conflict between the two sides increased, he started to take a very hardline policy against North Korea. Park Geun-hye, again, she begins her presidency of talking about trust politique. Like we should trust each other. We have to build, sort of trust building, mutual trust. But again, by midway, she was also very hardline politics towards a hardline policy towards North Korea. Moon Jae-in. Okay, so Moon Jae-in, as you know, during his campaign election, he talked about peace and engaging them. So basically, along the same line as Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, we should engage. We should work towards peace. He uses the word interaction and cooperation. But with Assad, the missile defense. A lot of people that supported the idea of engagement and interaction and cooperation with North Korea, they're very much criticizing Moon Jae-in for agreeing to have the Assad established in South Korea. So it's only been a couple of months, so we can't make any judgments at the time, but he's kind of using sort of hard and soft at the same time. And he's put in a predicament where I suppose he doesn't have much choice in the matter. But this is the word that he used. Just in July, when he was visiting Berlin, these are the words he used. He said peace, interaction, and cooperation. Just to mention just a little bit about sunshine policy. What sunshine policy was the separation of economic cooperation from political affairs. So put political affairs aside, but they would have humanitarian aid and help North Korean economy to facilitate the economy. And Kim Dae-jung mentions three principles. One is never tolerate armed provocation. And second, no intention to undermine or absorb North Korea because the idea, this seize mentality. He mentions that the South Korean government has no intention to undermine or absorb North Korea and to pursue reconciliation and cooperation building. So it was he wanted to engage North Korea, enable soft landing of North Korea without stepping on their toes. One of the things that the issue was, the North Koreans are always doubtful of South Korean policy towards them because they feel, maybe they're going to absorb us. But he specifically mentions that there is no intention to undermine the North Korean regime. What were the achievements of sunshine policy? As you know, the first ever meeting between North and South since the war takes place in June of 2000. President Kim Dae-jung was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Second summit occurs during Roh Moo-hyun administration on October 4th, 2007. So, of course, summit itself, from hindsight, it didn't really achieve a whole lot because obviously the North Korean regime has developed a nuclear program, and they haven't they haven't worked towards denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Having said that, I think it was a moment where they put faces. People were able to see the faces of people in North Korea. As I told you, the textbooks, they portray North Koreans as to be like wolves. This is back in the 50s and 60s, and I think it humanized North Korea. This is my personal opinion, but I think that it brought real people's faces to South Korean families. They're able to see, oh, maybe they're not really wolves. Maybe they're actually people on the other side that they're just like us. And I think these two, summits, people argue, this was pretty much useless because North Korea ended up developing their nuclear program anyway. I would beg to differ. I think that it gave a chance for people in South Korea, and also I think that it's for North Koreans too, to sort of humanize each other, and to know that there are people on the other side that have similar problems and have similar interests. Some of the more actual achievements, economic cooperation. So they had Mount Kumgang tourism. Over 2 million people had visited Kumgangsan. Also the Kaesong tourism and also the industrial complex. They were very successful during the Sunshine Policy and during Romuhyun. Also reunion of separated families. If you've ever seen this on TV, you cannot see it without having tears in your eyes. But these family members that were able to see each other, they had a reunion of separate families, and from the 1960 to 2008, about 13,000 families were reunited. They also established the Family Reunion Center in Kumgangsan in August of 2005. This was a groundbreaking sort of moment. They had the ceremony and everything. And also there was one military cooperation. They cooperated to remove the landmines. One big achievement I would say is that it humanized both sides. Some of the more practical sort of achievements, consequences, economic cooperation, they were able to reunite families. Also, they were able to cooperate on removing the landmines. Okay, so this is a photo. It was on The Guardian. It was also on CNN and many of the other news media. This is the satellite image of the luminosity of this region. So, you can see that where North Korea is completely dark. It's completely dark. They are facing a very huge crisis in North Korea in terms of humanitarian crisis. There's not enough food, not enough electricity. People are suffering on that side. So this is another one too as well. You can see that area is completely dark. So where did the crisis start? What happened? They were doing so well in the 60s. What happened after that? Well, it was the geostrategic context really changed after the 1960s. China pursued reform, was still pursuing reform. Soviet Union pursued reform, but the Soviet Union obviously collapses in 1991. They cut off aid and the massive trade. So obviously, North Korea was out of their biggest support. So with the industrial economy collapsing, it deprives agriculture of industrial inputs. The Juche strategy and limited exports meant declining access to commercial financing for imports. Agriculture yields and output fall. To maintain the output levels, increasingly marginal land is brought into production. But with that, there's environmental degradation. There's hillsides renewed, soil erosion, and river silting. So there's huge environmental degradation to improve the output because they're facing a crisis. But with more, increasingly using the increased use of marginal land, brought about all sorts of problems. And of course, there were a number of floods in 1990s. In 1995, there was a huge flood. But this was an opportunity for North Korea. because it provided cover to appeal for aid to the international community. And in North Korea, historically, food was distributed through the public distribution system. And basically, the government distributes the food, as they see fit. But the system breaks down, and increasingly food is allocated through the market. And of course, it's not in a large portion, but because the economy the state is failing in various ways, the economy is marketized. The economy marketized is in response to the state failure. Now, this is all ideas I have borrowed from Stephen Haggard, also some of the Japanese scholars who work in North Korea. They've done their extensive research on this. If you want some names, I could give it to you later. But this is some of the things that they have mentioned about North Korea. Okay, human rights issue. Of course, one of the serious issues, the North Korean defectors, as we had in the morning by Professor Stein, and also in the afternoon, Professor Lee also mentioned this. The North Korean defectors are facing all sorts of problems. In North Korea, exiting North Korea without proper, documentation and order, is criminalized, of course. But people are still crossing that border to China, of course illegally, and then they find their way to South Korea. Now, the current trend, as Professor Lee mentioned, is that many of them find it very difficult to adapt to South Korean society. Once the North Korean defector comes to Korea in various ways, they are first put into this center for re-education. It's called Hanawon, and you remain in Hanawon for 6 months, and they basically re-educate you. And they teach you, the Korean history and his society, things like this. And then they also have support to find jobs for them. If they're students, then they try to find. They help them with university entrance and whatnot. And so there is a support system. There is government support for North Korean defectors. But the problem is that that is not, of course, enough. They find it very hard to integrate with to society. Many of these North Korean defectors, they don't have any local friends. Many of their friends are also North Korean defectors. So it just makes it really hard for them to adjust to the South Korean society, and it's not because of information, or it's just they feel that they are sort of they're outside of society, and even though there are some these shows, and it's like on the surface it seems as though they're able to integrate, but a lot of people do. I mean, again, when you talk to 10 defectors, they'll have different stories, different narratives. Of course, I wouldn't say that they're all suffering. I don't need to victimize these people, but I know that a lot of them do have problems integrating to Korean society, and so the current trend is to seek another country, and Canada is quite popular. Now, in a bit, I'll show you a clip. So in Canada, there are a couple of NGOs and NPOs that help these North Korean defectors. One very big organization is called Han Voice, and they have these, also outreach programs, and they have these also fundraisers, and they have all sorts of these workshops and seminars to enlighten people about North Korean defectors. And I'll show you a clip in a bit of one of these North Korean defectors that went to Canada. Okay, these are not my photos. These are photos that my colleagues in Japan have allowed me to use for today's presentation. So a couple of my colleagues that work on North Korea, Mimura Mitsuhiro, he's based in Niigata. Also, Isozaki, he's also a North Korean specialist, and also what's his name, Fukuhara-san, from Shimane University, Professor Fukuhara. They all have been to North Korea. They go to North Korea very often because they travel on a Japanese passport. They go through China, and of course, it's all organized. It's organized tours, but they're able to go and they're allowed to take photos in certain places. And these, of course, they didn't take it, but without the authorities approving. So these photos they were able to take while they were being watched. And you can see that there are these small, when we talk about market, people imagine these huge markets, but these are very small markets. These local producers, selling their local fruit. Again, this woman, she's selling eggs and a couple of things. So you see these very small changes in North Korea. And as I was talking to Professor Reed this morning, we think that, we tend to think, change has to be something big. But for North Korea, a small change is a big change. And so my colleagues have been arguing that you see these small changes happening in North Korea. We don't know what that's going to lead to. We don't know whether that means another 10 years or 50 years. Who knows what the future holds? Again, I don't like to prophesize about the future either. But you see that it's changing. You see that there is some change happening inside North Korea. So what's South Korea facing today? So I couldn't, of course, list everything. I just mentioned a couple of things that you might want to, think about talking in your class. The ferry Seoul tragedy. Also the impeachment of Park Geun-hye and the new administration. And last but not least, multicultural Canada. The two professors already mentioned this a little bit, but I'll give you my take on this as well. It was a devastating incident in 2014 in April. It was the sinking of the Seoul ship. 304 students died, high school students died because of the ferry accident. Now, this ferry, the sinking of this ferry, a lot of people had sort of used the metaphor of Korea sinking at the same time. There's also places, in the beginning, a lot of Muslim people had problems with the food. They couldn't get halal food. But there are now markets where they can get halal food. The Muslim market, this is in Ansan. And this whole building is the Islamic Center. There's already a mosque in Itaewon in Korea, as you know. So, I mean, you see there's a big representation of Muslims in Korea. So now they are able to get their food, their halal food, in Korea. Just some photos of these marriage migrants. So there are these local government sponsored or local government supports these programs, and this is a cooking program where they teach these marriage migrants how to cook Korean food. This is a class on mannerism. So in Korea, as you know, you're supposed to greet your in-laws in a certain way. You have to bow in a certain way. So they have these mannerism courses where they teach these young marriage migrants how to greet their in-laws. This is a language program. This is the opening ceremony of a language program for marriage migrants. This was back in 2008, so it's been a while. This one is also a program to teach marriage migrants basic agriculture, like agricultural technology. And this was back in 2012. I was able to take this photo. It says 결혼이민, so marriage migrants, 여성, women or marriage migrants. 기초 농업 교육, all you can read Korean, so I suppose it's basic agricultural education, and it's the opening ceremony. Because many of the, as mentioned earlier, many of the Korean men that they marry are from the rural areas, because many with industrialization, urbanization, high education of women, high participation of women in labor force, basically that brought people to the city, and so the rural areas, they were lacking in brides. So this is why they had to bring brides from the outside, and this is where a lot of Korean men marry the foreign brides from abroad. I wouldn't say all of them, but I mean a lot of them. A lot of the marriages are through international brokerage, and now this is where they run into all sorts of problems. Is because the international brokers, of course, there's some honest ones, some very dishonest ones. There is a brokerage law, international marriage brokerage law in Korea that was established in 2008. And of course, it stipulates that they have to share all the information, necessary information. The laws there are regulations, but of course, the companies find ways to cut corners. But there has been several cases where the brokers have not been honest with their customers, and they ran into all sorts of problems. I'll just give you one example. There was a young Vietnamese woman, 19 years old, and she married someone from sort of the rural areas of Gyeongsang-do. And second week into her coming to Korea, she was killed by her husband. It turns out that he was schizophrenic. So, but the broker didn't relay that information to her. So this is only one of the many cases that happens in Korea. But in any case, Vietnamese women are very much popular, and some of the things that the international brokers sort of in their advertisement, they use these words. They use these very patriarchal words, like they're very traditional. They'll bring something that the Korean women have lost. They'll bring to your family the virtues that our Korean women have all forgotten about. I mean, these really ridiculous things, but people buy into them, and they're doing really well. They're profiting through this. And because Vietnamese women and many of the women that come, they share that sort of tradition of looking after the family. Families are supposed to look out for each other. That's why they take care of their parents. They don't outsource care like some of the other Korean women do. So Vietnamese women, in terms of percentage, Chinese still are the top. Like they're many of foreign brides are from China. Second to that is Vietnam. And this is a language course, Korean language course, specifically for Vietnamese women. And this is in middle of Seoul. And it's interesting. This is something that I need to look into more. Is that these Vietnamese women in Vietnam, of course, they don't protest like this, but they've been in Korea and they see how the Korean system works, and they see that protest can actually make a huge difference. It could make an influence. And so what they do is they take to the streets. So this is in front of the National Assembly, and they're protesting against more rights for them and more protection. And so it's interesting that these women come to Korea and they use very Korean sort of ways to influence, or to project their voice. And you see a lot of Korean people, of course, support this as well. There are Korean people, local people that participate in these movements as well. And if you, this is a special program on KBS about the domestic care workers, domestic workers. So many of them are from ethnic Koreans from China. They call them Chosunjo. So it says Chosunjo Imo. So Imo, it's a very, it's a term to make it very personable. The nanny, more personable. So it says Chosunjo Imo 불편한 동거, uncomfortable living together, uncomfortable life living together. So many domestic workers in Korea, I think a lot less than before, but about half of them are live-ins. And it's too expensive. And the Korean families also like them to live in as well, because it reduces the time for them to commute, and they're there 24 hours a day. They can, if something happens to the children, they can help them out. So they do prefer live-ins, but it's too expensive to hire Korean nannies. So what people opt to do is to hire ethnic Koreans from China. They speak the language. They know Korean tradition, so the ethnic proximity makes them very favorable. But I'll just again show you another example. There was a Chosunjo woman that I was interviewing, and she went to an interview, and it was a family of doctors, a husband and wife, they're both doctors. And they just had their second baby. So they had a different nanny for their first son, and then they wanted to have another nanny for the second son. And so they were hiring 2 nannies for the 2 kids. And apparently this is not uncommon. So they want undivided attention to that one child, so that's why they hire 2 different nannies for 2 different kids. Anyway, so so she went in for the interview, and the first thing they asked her was, can you please go and get a blood test? We'll pay for the blood test. And she has said, well, there's nothing wrong with me. Why should I get a blood test? So, and then basically they said to her that we want to make sure they don't have any disease, because we just had a new baby and we were very worried about it. And then the second thing they said was, we would rather you speak in proper Korean. And see, this is where the idea of exclusion takes place. They're in Korea and they're hired because of their ethnic proximity. Yet they are excluded because they don't speak the right dialect. They don't speak with the right accent. So she's from Yeongbyon, from China, and they do have a dialect. And so the family, they asked her specifically, not to speak to her child because they were worried that he would pick it up. And so she was furious and decided, I'm not going to take this job. Forget the money. I don't want to be treated like this. And so, these things happen. Again, I don't want to make a generalization. I do have a lot of happy stories too. So you're more than welcome to ask me about the happy stories. But this is one of the cases, where they're brought to Korea and they're hired based upon this ethnic proximity. Yet they're excluded in all sorts of ways. So we were talking about Sai this morning. So mini Sai, little Sai. Mini Sai is actually half Vietnamese, half Korean. So his name is Hwang, right? And when the video came out, it went viral, and everyone was like, "Who's that little mini Sai?" And there was this hype about him. And of course, everyone thought he was Korean, and it turns out he wasn't. And he isn't. He's half Vietnamese. And so again, on the internet, there were all these very unnecessary comments about how he's not really Korean or how he shouldn't be on TV. He's stealing opportunities of Koreans. And so I think at the end they sued the entertainment company. I don't remember the details. Anyway, this is his family. So father is a little bit older than the mother, and mom's from Vietnam. And he speaks. And they were on TV. When he was very popular, they were on TV. The whole family was on TV. And one thing that struck me, which you can all have probably an opinion about this, but she said, "I raised him to be a Korean." This is the phrase she said. And that makes me really uncomfortable. And Professor Ree probably will say the same thing. It makes me really uncomfortable when they say, "I raised him as a Korean." He doesn't have. He's born and raised in Korea, so obviously and his father's Korean, so he's Korean. But at the same time, he's also half Vietnamese, and they should be able to enjoy that. The duality of this child. But she kept on insisting on TV that she wants to raise him as a proper Korean, and that really kind of bothered me. Okay, so just I know all of you are teaching in high schools, but I do this with my students. I instead of me explaining, I know a lot of them, instead of explaining them in like so many words, showing a movie or documentary is really effective. And these are some of the movies that I showed my students, and they were very popular. For instance, who's seen 국제시장 before? Yeah, you have seen it. Yeah, so it's about a man, sort of a. the movie's about this ordinary man's life, but it also goes through the history of Korea. He goes to Vietnam, and he's also sent as a coal miner to Germany, and so you see the history of Korea, the progress that they went through the life of this young man. So it's quite a good movie. I don't want to spoil the movie, so for those of you who haven't seen it, it starts out with his family escaping from North Korea, from Hamon during the Korean War, and that's where. And then they moved to Busan. They escaped to Busan, and then that's where the story takes place in Busan, and he goes through various things. Second one, this is 나의 결혼 원조기. It's the English title is called Wedding Campaign, and it's about these two Korean men from Gyeongsang-do province going to Uzbekistan to find their wives, their potential wives. So it says 신부감 대불고 오겠습니다. So 대불고 is a Gyeongsang accent. So I will bring my bride. So it's again, it's a fictional movie, but based on a real phenomenon that's happening in Korea. Last but not least, Pyonoin. So this is a movie based on the life of Roh Moo-hyun when he was a human rights lawyer, and it also talks about the Gwangju uprising. And so, if you're interested, these are great movies to show students, just to get a taste of Korea. Last but not least, about LGBT, I wanted to mention that. If you can give me 2-3 minutes. So, in East Asia, LGBT, of course, this was not talked about. But recently, in Korea, as Professor Ri has mentioned, there has been a lot of movement by LGBT community. One of the, of course, obstacles, and I'm not also saying that Christianity is a problem, but we do have extreme sort of conservative Christian groups that are very much against this. And also because of the military, because they have national services, this also poses a problem. Moon Jae-in, during his presidential campaign, he sort of hinted on special act for LGBT community. Of course, once he was elected, he decided just before he was elected, he mentioned outright that he would not implement this special law, and that's why he lost a lot of support from the LGBT community. They really supported him in the beginning, but they did lose when he mentioned that he wasn't going to implement this law. He did lose quite a bit of support. And there was conflict between the LGBT group and Moon Jae-in when he was a candidate. There are a group of lawyers, public lawyers that themselves are LGBT, and also they're working for LGBT rights. There was a really important case, a civil court case, where two same-sex partners, one was in ICU, and the partner wanted to go see him at the ICU, and so they were asking the court for special permission to go see him, even though it was only a visit to the ICU restricted to family members. They lost the case, but they're slowly but surely taking these issues to court, and these become public. And once they become public, people know about it. And so there was a lot of support for them. And the lawyer that was responsible, Yu Min-hee, lawyer, she was the one that was a lawyer for the case, and she said that they're very upset that they lost the case, but it's important that they have have people know about this. And so she was happy that more and more people are bringing these cases to them. So they work. There's a group of them that work on these certain cases. Just to give you a comparison, in Japan, since 2015, certain local governments, not all throughout Japan, but these couple of administrative districts in Tokyo, Setagaya and Shibuya, where a lot of there's a big LGBT community there. They have what is called the partnership certificate. It's not legally binding. You basically go and they give you a certificate that proves that you're of same-sex partner. It's not legally binding, but it's upon the discretion of the hospital or like cell phone companies or insurance companies. But you can take them, and in most cases they do accept it, and they do give visitation rights for their partner in ICU. And SoftBank is one of the cellular phone company in Japan. They allow family discounts for same-sex partners, And there's also MetLife insurance that they allow people to have life insurance for same-sex partners, so they can become beneficiaries of each other. Taiwan by far is the most advanced in that sense. As you know, the courts ruled that it was unconstitutional not to allow same-sex marriage, so they have to implement that in the next 2 years. So you see that in East Asia, and I don't include China in there. I don't know much about LGBT in China, but Taiwan by far they're advanced. Japan in the middle, and Korea. I mean, in terms of like any kind of framework. I mean, they don't even have partnership agreement or partnership certificate. But I think there is a growing understanding, a lot more than before, of these people. And the Pride March. It's actually interesting. Japan and Korea, they had the Pride March around the same time in early 2000s. So it's been quite some time now that they had the Pride March in Korea. And this is where we can kind of cooperate in East Asia. I know a lot of Japanese politicians that worked for that work to implement the partnership certificate, they went to Taiwan and they also go to Korea and they advise each other on what they've been doing and how to bring about, how the outreach programs, how to let people know. And so you see a lot of cooperation among these three countries and regions in terms of LGBT. Yeah. So with that, I will end my lecture. I think it's just about time, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. So thank you, everyone.